so amazing, but it's just really beautiful.
Welcome, bienvenidos a este canal. My name is Brooke, and I do videos about, whoops, that just fell. I do videos about travel and stories of unusual adventures, I suppose. I'm not really sure what I do here yet, but if that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned. Today we are going to be talking about Mexico City, and if I can find the page. Turns out I never wrote down my ideas, so forget that. Today we're going to be talking about my misconceptions about Mexico City, and misconceptions, stereotypes, things like that a lot of you may also have. And I will be sharing my personal experience over the summer, as I lived there from, when was it? June until October. It was August, so about like 2 or 3 months that I was there living with a Mexican host family in Mexico City, specifically in Tlalpan. The first thing that I noticed upon arriving in Mexico City was that it was very, very cold. And this was a little surprising to me because I grew up in the state of Chihuahua, which is northern Mexico, and Mexico City is, central Mexico. So I just figured the further south you go in Mexico, the warmer it becomes, closer to the equator, Well, apparently that is not true. And I did not take into consideration that Mexico City is very high. Hello, kitty. Mexico City's elevation is 7,349 feet, whereas here in Maryland, where I live now, people consider it, mountains. It's close to the Appalachian Mountains, and we live at 2,385 feet. So you can imagine that's pretty high up there. And not only that, but the first 2 weeks that you're there, you're just adjusting to the elevation because it just takes a toll on your body. Like, I just felt like I was sick all the time. You can never catch your breath. You feel dehydrated. You just feel like you have a fever and a bunch of other things. And that's just a very common experience for people who are not used to high elevation to go to a place with high elevation. So that was the first thing I noticed. I was expecting maybe 80-degree weather every single day. Also, to point out there, in the summer, it is a rainy season, so it does get kind of cold. The next thing was how big Mexico City is. And you're probably thinking, yes, Brooke, Mexico City is huge. Everybody knows that. It's one of the biggest cities in the world. How could you not know that? Well, I grew up in an indigenous village of 100 people, so I'm just not really used to city living, and I always thought of myself as a city person until I moved to San Juan in Puerto Rico, and then after that moving to Mexico City, and it was just a shock. More than culture shock, I definitely experienced city shock. It's just wherever you go, you're just surrounded by tons of people going through the metro, like people just shoving and squeezing in tight places, and their social distance seems to be more like 3 feet rather than 6 feet, just because there's no way you could do 6 feet. So it was just a really, really big city, and you can drive for an hour from south to the north, and you'd still be in the city, and it's just crazy. It's hard to get away from people. So that was overwhelming to me, just because I'm not used to that. If you love the city, if you live in like New York or something, you'd probably love it too. But it was just not at all what I was expecting. Like, people have said Mexico City is big, but I just didn't realize how big. Another thing, this one drove me crazy. The quesadillas in Mexico City do not have queso. I will repeat, the quesadillas do not have cheese when you order them, which is weird because the word quesadilla has the word queso in it. So it's interesting, but you can order quesadilla anywhere else in Mexico and you will get cheese in your quesadilla. But in Mexico City, you have to specify that you want them to add queso to your quesadilla. Another misconception I think a lot of people have is that Mexico is just one and the same culture wherever you go. And that is completely not true. It is such a big country, and going just from north to south or just to the coast, like, it's crazy different. The culture is different, the music is different. Obviously, they still have a lot of things in common, but just even the food is slightly different, music, the culture, just so many things. So Mexico City really just felt like an entirely different Mexico to me because, like I said, I grew up in a very different area of Mexico. So it was interesting getting to experience more of what Mexico City was like, completely different culture. And even going to like Yucatan, completely different. Their accents are different also. It's just so funny to me, and I would love to go to every state in Mexico. That is on my bucket list. I want to experience the different foods, just the way of life, everything from like beach towns to villages to cities. I want to just experience it all. This was something I also thought I didn't think about when I arrived to Mexico, was just how rich in history and culture they truly are. From everything from castles to pyramids to just so many things. And it's just amazing. Like, they have so many pyramids there, from the Aztec and the Mayans, and just seeing the architecture on those pyramids being completely different because of who built it and why they built it. And it's just such a mystery to me, and I love learning more about it. My host brother from the family I was living in, he taught me so much about the music in Mexico and just the history in general. And I just have begun to notice that Mexicans have such a deep pride for their history and their country, and just knowing where it came from and like their original ancestors, like the indigenous people and all these different things. It's so interesting. If you speak Spanish and you go to Mexico, you will realize right away that so many of their words that they use today are not Spanish. In fact, they are part of indigenous languages there in Mexico. And actually, the word avocado comes from an indigenous group in Mexico. But so many things like places, and like, for example, I lived in Tlalpan, and that is an indigenous word, and it took me forever to learn how to pronounce it. Yeah. So there are just so many different things that you wouldn't think of. And something I just thought was so interesting, this is very random, but apparently people, I feel like Mexicans just have this stereotype of not being like a very safe place. Like, Mexico in general, it's not really like a super safe place. Like, you always have your house behind bars, you always lock up, things like that. It's more like common sense of living in a city. But to some people that looks like, oh my goodness, it's so unsafe. But on the flip side, whenever the public transportation, like the public buses, are so packed full of people, you have people like hanging out the door, And if someone gets on in the back of the bus, they will hand their like 6 pesos and they'll pass it up through a person and be like, I'm in the back of the bus, so I'll hand it to the next person, and he'll hand it to the next person, who will hand it to the next person, until it reaches to the bus driver. And it's just part of their culture, and it's common sense that that's what they do, so nobody would ever think to like take their money. And it's just, I don't know, I just thought it was so random and kind of cool that they do that, and yet a lot of people think that Mexico is dangerous, quote unquote. And that just all depends on your definition of danger. That is a whole nother topic that I'm not even going to touch. But yeah, so little things like that I thought were very interesting. It's definitely a wonderful place. 10 out of 10 recommend that you should at least once in your life go and visit the place, especially if you are into history. I am not someone who's into history, but I definitely still enjoyed it, and I loved getting to hear from especially people like my host family and hearing about how things were when they grew up and how they are now, and just so many beautiful things and stories. Okay, but what I was doing there besides just those random facts that I threw out there for you guys, I was there on like a 2.5 month mission trip through a program called Avance. And it's a really neat program because they have you staying with Mexican host families, and you get to experience the culture in a whole new way. They have you involved in that host family's church, and I was staying in that host family with another girl through the program. And there were about 11 of us in the program in total, so all of us were in different parts of Mexico City staying with host families. And it was just a really unique and neat way to spend the summer. It was honestly one of the longest summers I've ever had. It was hard, it was good, it was exhausting, it was, I don't even know, so many words. But yeah, so we would usually have a few free days to be with the family, to work with ministry at the church, and then we would have classes every single day in more of the center of the city. And those classes consisted of Spanish classes or just cultural classes, biblical classes, and a lot of it was even just, the culture of Mexico and the Roman Catholic Church and what they believe and the history of Mexico, so that we could better understand the places that these people were coming from, and just how to better respect their culture, and just so many different things. So I really appreciated the program for that, just really being, sensitive to the culture around us and not just coming in and being like, hey, we are here to change you guys, because that is not how it should be. But anyway, it was a really neat time. I loved my host family. For the first few weeks we were there with Alison, which is a little girl from all the little video clips I'm about to show. But her and her mom were staying with us because they were in a bad situation with their family, so they were living with us and my host family all on top of it. But I thoroughly enjoyed that little girl. She is amazing. She made my time so amazing. But yeah, I enjoyed getting to know our host family, their culture, hearing them talk about things like how Tlalpan was when they were younger and what it was like and how they met and how they came to be Christians and how they found the church that they were involved in. And it was just so very interesting. It was definitely a very hard summer, I am not gonna lie. Probably one of the hardest summers I've had. But overall, I feel like I just learned so much through that time. And I do really miss my host family a lot, and especially little Alison.
Boca.
Orejas.
Orejas.
Cabeza.
Cabeza.
Cara.
Cara.
Cansada.
Cansada.
Y luego para acá de regreso, ¿dónde? O sea, vas y regresas, pero luego para volver a tomar esta.
Mira, qué tanto.
La cruz delante, el mundo atrás quedó. La cruz delante.
What are you doing? Anyway, say goodbye, little kitty. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.
The museum isn't so amazing, but it's just really beautiful.